Why was everyone laughing at her? That was the question that hung in the cold morning air over Fort Carson's sniper range. It wasn't the kind of laughter that came from humor. It was the kind that scraped like sandpaper, brittle, cruel, and insecure. The kind soldiers used when they didn't understand something or someone. She stood there, quiet, motionless. A woman with a face half burned by war and a rifle older than anyone else on the range. The morning light caught the metal edges of that rifle like it was made of memory and defiance. Get that piece of junk off my range before it explodes in your face. Sergeant Mason's voice cracked through the air, arrogant and loud, carrying the confidence of a man who'd never been truly tested. His finger jabbed toward her rifle, an ancient, its wood darkened with age and scars of its own. The soldiers around them chuckled. "Where'd she even get that thing? A museum," someone said. "Maybe she's filming a World War II reenactment," another laughed. The woman didn't flinch. She set down her rifle case carefully, the motion slow, deliberate, like she was lowering something sacred. "Ma'am, this is a precision shooting facility, not a relic exhibition," Mason said, puffing out his chest. "That Soviet antique doesn't belong here." The woman looked at him for the first time. One eye, gray as cold steel, studied him without expression. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low and controlled. "I have authorization." Her accent was faint, Eastern European, maybe Russian, maybe something else. She handed him a crumpled day pass. Mason took it, barely glanced at it, then let it drift to the ground like it disgusted him. "Authorization or not," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you're a safety hazard. Take your garage sale rifle and get out." The laughter returned. But Private, standing near the ammunition shed, didn't join in. She couldn't. Something about the woman's stillness unsettled her. It wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't shame. It was patience. Watched her closely. The way her shoulders didn't tense, the way her breathing stayed perfectly steady. That wasn't the posture of someone intimidated. That was the posture of someone waiting. Mason stepped closer, trying to tower over her. "I don't care who signed that slip. This is a military range. We don't allow outdated junk here." The woman's eyes flicked toward him just for a second. In that moment, even Mason, though he wouldn't admit it, felt something tighten in his chest. There was something in that look, something ancient, dangerous, and heartbreakingly calm. "The rifle is maintained," she said. "It will shoot." The sunlight touched the worst of her scars as she tilted her head slightly. The left side of her face looked like melted wax, reshaped by a surgeon who remembered the shape of humanity only loosely. The damage trailed down her neck and disappeared beneath the collar of a faded field jacket. Staff Sergeant stepped out from the range office, clipboard in hand, expression flat. "Civilian range time doesn't start until 1400 hours," she said without meeting the woman's eyes. "You'll need to clear the area until then." But the woman didn't move. She knelt beside her rifle case and began to open it with movements that were too precise, too economical, too professional. The air shifted. Inside, the rested in a custom-cut foam cradle. Its steel had been polished by decades of hands. The wooden stock, worn smooth, cracked, yet lovingly cared for, caught the light like a relic from another era. The crowd leaned closer, curiosity replacing laughter. She lifted the rifle with both hands. Her gloves were worn, the fingertips reinforced with burn-resistant material. When her fingers settled into position, her entire body changed. Her breathing slowed. 4 counts in, 7 counts held, 8 counts out. A rhythm only elite marksmen were taught. Recognized it instantly. The breathing pattern they drilled into Special Forces snipers. The kind that turned humans into weapons platforms. "Put it away," Mason ordered. His tone had shifted, something uncertain creeping into the edges. But the woman didn't move. She stood holding the rifle low and relaxed, almost casually. "1 magazine," she said quietly. "Then I'll leave." The challenge hung there like a live wire. Mason smirked. "Fine, 1 mag, 5 rounds. When you can't hit paper at 100 yards, you're gone." He didn't realize it yet, but the game had already shifted. From the observation tower, Colonel James Mitchell adjusted his binoculars. The arthritis in his hands made the focus wheel stiff, but he didn't stop watching. Something about this woman, her movements, her presence, and the way she parked her truck that morning, perfectly positioned with line of sight to every exit. He had been waiting 8 years for a ghost to reappear. The woman walked toward the firing line. The soldiers had stopped their drills to watch, some out of curiosity, others out of the growing sense that something about this wasn't normal. She moved like someone who had spent too long surviving to waste energy on anything unnecessary. She lay prone on the mat, the rifle cradled into her shoulder with the ease of ritual. The old weapon looked alive in her hands, not like a relic, but like a part of her body, an extension of her scars, her breath, her heartbeat. Stepped closer, watching the small details, how the woman's left hand adjusted the sling, how her right thumb rested along the bolt handle. None of it was casual. None of it was amateur. Mason crossed his arms, pretending not to care. "Targets at 300, he called out, voice just loud enough for the crowd. "That's 3 times farther than that antique's ever shot accurately." The soldiers laughed again, but softer this time. The name stitched faintly into her worn jacket didn't answer. Her eyes narrowed behind the iron sights. She didn't use the modern digital range meters or wind sensors. She just looked. Her eyes tracked the blades of grass along the range, reading the invisible dance of air currents, the shimmer of heat off the earth. Her breath became the clockwork of the moment. In, hold, out. Then, without ceremony, she fired. The sound was different from the others, deeper, resonant. It wasn't just a gunshot. It was a memory, echoing through steel and history. The target monitor flickered. 1 perfect hole, dead center. Mason scoffed, lucky shot. The second round came before the echo of the first had died. Same hole. The range fell silent. The spotters checked their scopes, adjusted, checked again. No mistake, 2 rounds, 1 hole. By the third shot, no one was laughing. The silence was almost reverent. The fourth bullet tore through the same point, physics and disbelief folding into each other. Private, arriving late, froze at the sight. Her heart pounded in her throat. 5 rounds later, 1 ragged hole, 300 yards, iron sights. Stood, reloading with the same calm rhythm she'd carried through the entire session. Not a single wasted movement, not a tremor in her hands. When she turned, the soldiers stepped aside without realizing it. The silence wasn't just respect, it was awe. And fear. Mason's jaw worked silently. His hand drifted toward the old scar on his wrist. "Impossible," whispered, clipboard hanging loose at her side. Colonel Mitchell's radio crackled softly as he descended the tower. "Code White," he murmured into the receiver. "Yes, sir, she's here." Began walking back toward her case, but Mason stepped in front of her, panic sparking behind his bravado. "Lucky shots," he barked. "Let's see you do it at 600. The crowd stirred. Even frowned. 600 yards with iron sights. It was madness. His eyes met Mason's, and something in him broke. Recognition flickered deep and sudden. 600, she said simply. Same target. No one dared stop it. Even the MPs stayed still, watching history reload itself. As settled into position again, Colonel Mitchell stood at the edge of the firing line. His voice was low, gravelly. "Someone who should be dead, Private," he murmured too. "Someone who sacrificed everything." The wind had picked up now, gusting 20, 25 miles per hour. It would throw any shot wildly off course. But didn't care. She read the air like scripture, found the stillness between chaos. Her breathing fell into the pattern again. 4, 7, 8. The rifle barked once more. Impact. Center mass. Then 4 more, each hitting the same hole, impossibly tight. No one moved, no one spoke. And then quietly Mason whispered it, barely audible, trembling. "You're dead, you died in Kandahar." Rose slowly. The look in her eyes was colder than the wind. 3 survived, she said. Because I drew their fire, 3 lived because I stayed. Mason's hand shook as he reached for his sidearm. "You're not real," he stammered. "You can't be her. White Death died in that valley." "Sergeant Mason, stand down." Colonel Mitchell's voice snapped like thunder. He strode forward, eyes never leaving the woman. "Captain," he said, his tone equal parts awe and relief, "welcome back." And that was the moment the laughter died for good. Every soldier on that range now understood exactly what they were seeing. Not a burned woman with an old rifle. Not a relic of another era. But a ghost made flesh again. A legend breathing in the light of day. The rifle, the scars, the silence, every piece of her had been tempered by fire. And the man who mocked her, he was finally starting to remember what that fire had cost. The morning wind carried the faint smell of gunpowder and something else, truth. And it was only beginning. She didn't speak for several seconds. Didn't need to. The wind carried the echo of her last shot downrange, fading into the distant Colorado hills. Every soldier stood frozen, like they were afraid to even breathe too loud in her presence. Mason was trembling. He didn't know whether to reach for his gun or run. Neither would have saved him. The name spread through the crowd in hushed confusion, disbelief rolling like ripples through water. Someone whispered, "She's a myth, the sniper who went missing in Kandahar. That can't be her." But it was. Colonel Mitchell stopped just short of her, the years of command softening for the first time in anyone's memory. "Captain," he said quietly, "we thought you were gone." "I was," she replied simply. Her voice had the cadence of someone who'd accepted death once and never quite came back the same. She slung the across her shoulder with quiet reverence, like she was sheathing a sword. Then she looked at Mason. Her tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You remember Kandahar?" Mason's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her question hung in the cold air like a trigger half pulled. Felt the hair rise on her arms. Kandahar, the word alone carried ghosts, rumors, a mission that ended in fire and silence. 7 operators deployed, only 3 came back. No one ever talked about it. The official report said insurgent ambush, white phosphorus strike, classified aftermath. No names, no survivors listed by record. But the whispers said one woman had stayed behind to cover their retreat. And she had burned for it. Mason stumbled backward, words tumbling out of him in panic. "You're dead, you died in that valley. Everyone knows that," the report said. The report, cut in softly, was written by a man who needed me gone. Mitchell raised a hand, signaling the MPs to step in, but calm stopped them. She stepped closer to Mason. Her boots crunched on gravel, slow, deliberate. "You changed the comm frequencies that night," she said. "You sent us in with outdated coordinates. You told us backup was 5 minutes away." Mason shook his head violently. "No, that's not. You delayed the quick reaction force by 20. Her words were a scalpel, each one cut. Every syllable peeled away his armor. "I don't know what you're talking about," Mason spat, voice breaking. "You're insane. You shouldn't even be here." But he didn't move. He couldn't. The truth was anchoring him in place. Mitchell's voice came, low and steady. "I've been waiting 8 years to see your face when she came back." The crowd had turned from spectators into witnesses. No one spoke, No one blinked. Could feel her own pulse in her throat. His face was unreadable, but her eyes were ancient, holding every burned second of those 3 hours in the valley. 3 survived, she said quietly. Because I stayed. Mason took another step back. They said no one could live through that, the phosphorus. Her hand reached up, slowly, calmly. She pulled off one glove. Every soldier there saw it, the warped, pale skin twisted by deep burns, the discolored patches where flesh had fused and healed the wrong way. The hand of someone who had literally melted and still clawed her way out of hell. 78% coverage, she said. Full thickness burns over half my body. She flexed her fingers. Doctors said I'd never hold a rifle again. Then she looked at the slung over her shoulder. They were wrong. Private had tears in her eyes. She didn't even know why. Something about the woman's voice, the quiet weight behind it, cracked through every layer of military conditioning. Mason tried to laugh, but it came out strangled. You're a ghost, that's what you are, a rumor. Studied him in silence. Then she spoke, softer this time, the kind of softness that carried more threat than any scream. Do you remember their names? The question hit like recoil. Mason's breath faltered. Took a step closer. Do you remember who you sold? She asked. Her eyes flicked toward the younger soldiers. They were human, not just names on an op report. Her accent thickened slightly, emotion breaking through the control. David, radio operator. He was 22, always joked when he was afraid. Do you remember? Private froze. The name struck her like lightning. Her brother. Mason's eyes darted to her, and in that split-second glance, the entire base knew. He knew the name, he knew the details. And he shouldn't have. Mitchell's voice was iron now. How do you know that, Sergeant? Mason opened his mouth, closed it. I read the report, he stammered. The report was sealed, Mitchell snapped. Level 5 clearance only. A murmur ran through the soldiers. Moved closer until she was only a few feet away. Her voice softened again, like she was remembering something she didn't want to. David called for backup until his radio melted, she said. He screamed your name until the fire took the sound. Mason's face went pale. He reached instinctively for his pistol. And 30 rifles immediately pointed at him. The MPs, the other soldiers, even had raised her weapon without thinking. Stand down, Mitchell barked. Nobody fires. Mason's hand trembled. Sweat poured down his temple. I didn't mean. They offered so much money. Gasps rippled through the crowd. His expression didn't change. Her silence was more powerful than any accusation. Mitchell stepped forward, pulling a military tablet from his pocket. He tapped a few times, then turned the screen toward the soldiers. $2 million, he said, transferred into an offshore account under Mason's name. January 3, 2016, 6 hours before the ambush. The truth hit like a bullet. Mason's breath came in ragged gasps. You can't prove anything. That's circumstantial. Then explain this. Reached into her rifle case, pulled out a worn manila envelope. From it a single document, edges frayed, ink faded but legible. She held it up. Orders, she said, dated January 2, 2016. Mason's own signature was on the bottom. You changed the frequencies 12 hours before the mission, she said. Standard protocol required 72, but you pushed it through. Mason lunged for the paper, but stepped back. You gave those frequencies to network, she said, voice rising for the first time. You sold us to the enemy. The air went deathly still. The young soldiers looked around at one another, their faces pale, their loyalty fracturing under the weight of betrayal. Mitchell's tone turned cold as granite. Sergeant Mason, you are under arrest for treason. The MPs moved in, but Mason wasn't done. "You don't understand," he screamed. "They'll kill me if I talk. You think this ends with me. They're still out there, still paying." Didn't move. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes, those gray, war-torn eyes, burned with a kind of pity that felt heavier than hatred. "Prison or them," she said quietly. "Those are your choices now." The MPs grabbed his arms, but she stepped forward again. "Before you go," she said, "tell her the truth." Mason blinked in confusion. "Turn toward Private. Tell her why her brother died." The world narrowed to those three people: the ghost, the traitor, and the sister. Mason's lips trembled. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't know they'd use phosphorus. I thought it'd be fast, just an ambush. They said no one would suffer." His voice cut through him like a wire drawn over glass. You didn't know they'd block our escape routes, jam our comms, burn us alive." Her words echoed across the range. No one dared move. "There's no excuse for what you did," Mitchell said, his tone low and final. "You sold your own people." The CIA liaison, no one had noticed her arrive, stepped forward, badge in hand. "Sergeant Mason, you are hereby detained under the Espionage and Treason Act. Anything you say can and will be used against you." As the MPs led him away, Mason looked back over his shoulder at. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I swear I didn't know what they'd do." But didn't answer. She was kneeling again beside her rifle, tracing her fingers along the stock. The rifle that had saved her life, that had carried her through the fire. Private approached slowly, tears streaming down her face. "My brother," she said. "Was it quick?" Looked up at her, eyes soft for the first time. "No," she said quietly, "but he wasn't alone. I held his hand. He talked about you, about your parents. He made me promise." Her voice faltered. "He made me promise to tell you he wasn't scared." Broke down completely, collapsing beside her. Reached out, steadying her. The crowd around them stood in silence, a sacred, wordless respect that no order could command. Mitchell approached, voice tight with emotion. "Captain," he said formally, "the United States Army owes you an apology. Your rank, your record, your honors, everything will be restored. You deserve that." Shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "Captain died in that valley. I'm just now." Mitchell frowned. "You can't just walk away after this. You're part of this story, whether you like it or not." "I didn't come here for redemption," she said. "I came here for truth." She stood, closed the rifle case, and secured its latches. Then, with the sun cutting through the morning haze, she walked past every soldier on that range. No salute, no ceremony. Just silence. Watched her go, that woman with the old rifle, walking through the wind as if the world owed her nothing. And maybe that was what made her different. Heroes wanted recognition. Legends wanted justice. But she only wanted the truth to stop burning. And somewhere behind her, Mason screamed her name as the MPs dragged him away, the name of the ghost who'd come back to haunt the living. The range was silent long after she left. Only the wind spoke, brushing over the spent brass like whispers of ghosts that had finally been heard. Colonel Mitchell remained where he stood, binoculars dangling from his hand, eyes on the distant gate where his old truck disappeared down the road. He'd seen hundreds of soldiers come and go, but never one who carried silence the way she did, like armor. Around him, the younger troops still hadn't moved. A few rubbed at goose flesh, as if shaking off a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Private knelt in the dust, her brother's name still ringing in her ears, crouched beside her, saying nothing. There wasn't anything to say. Mitchell exhaled slowly. "Pack it up," he said at last. "Range is closed." No one argued. Later, the after-action report would describe the morning as an unsanctioned civilian firing demonstration. That was how the military liked to file miracles, under paperwork that sounded dull. But inside the command offices of Fort Carson, the air buzzed with quiet panic. By nightfall, word had spread through every barracks. The ghost from Kandahar was alive, and she'd come back with a rifle older than the war that her. Some said she'd shot through the same hole 5 times at 600 yards. Others swore she'd stared a traitor into confession. Truth, rumor, at this point they were the same thing. Mitchell sat alone in his office, the blinds half closed, the light falling across files marked classified Kandahar incident. He'd reopened them the moment she walked off the range. 8 years. 8 years of silence, of bureaucratic stonewalls, of half-truths and missing pages. Now the ghost had names, evidence, witnesses. He poured a measure of whiskey. He wouldn't drink and stared at the photo pinned inside the folder. Captain Sniper, foreign liaison, hero without a grave. He remembered the first time he met her. Kandahar airfield. She'd been younger then, unscarred, eyes sharp as rifle glass. A quiet addition to a joint task unit. Half the men didn't know how she'd been cleared. Russian training, Danish roots, American contract. Too many flags for one soldier, yet she fit in as if war spoke one language. Mitchell rubbed the ache from his knuckles. "She's back," he muttered, "and God help whoever made her crawl out of the fire." Outside, Private watched the MPs load Mason into an armored van. He looked smaller now, the swagger gone. The burns of guilt showed faster than any chemical. "Sir," she asked quietly, "what happens to her now, Captain?" Mitchell paused at the door. "She finds the rest of the people who made that valley burn," he said, "and if we're smart we let her." Across town, in a cheap motel room that smelled of gun oil and detergent, cleaned the... It was a ritual, not maintenance, each motion a meditation. She could still feel the tremor in her muscles, the old nerve damage that never fully healed. Even now, the act of cycling the bolt made her fingers ache, but she welcomed it. Pain was proof that she still had a body. On the bed beside her lay a folded paper, the photo of David's notebook she'd returned earlier that day. She hadn't meant to speak his name aloud. Some promises slipped out like breath. Outside, the world kept moving, cars, sirens, the distant rumble of a freight train. But inside that small room, time had stopped 8 years ago. She could still hear the phosphorus rounds hissing through the valley, the radio static melting into screams. Still smell the cordite, the burning fabric, the sickly sweetness of flesh turning to ash. Still feel the weight of the rifle, hot against her cheek, as she fired until the bolt seized. People thought bravery was the absence of fear. It was. Bravery was doing the next necessary thing, while fear tried to drown you. She'd done that for 3 hours. 3 hours that never ended. A knock rattled the door. Didn't reach for a weapon. Whoever was on the other side already knew better than to try surprise. When she opened it, Colonel Mitchell stood there, hat under his arm. The years showed heavy on him now. "I figured you'd be here," he said. She stepped aside wordlessly, gesturing to the single chair. Mitchell looked around. No pictures, no TV, just maps, ammunition boxes, and silence. Still traveling light. "Easier to leave when you don't unpack," she said. He sat. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft click of her cloth as she wiped oil from the rifle's bolt. Finally he said, "You know they'll come for you now." She met his eyes. "They already have 4 times. They keep underestimating ghosts." Mitchell's lips pressed into a thin line. "You planning on disappearing again?" "I planned on shooting targets," she said. Then he showed up. Maybe fate wanted a witness. Fate, a poor excuse for incompetence. He chuckled softly, still blunt. She didn't smile. "Why reopen it now?" "Because Mason isn't the end of it," Mitchell said. "We've been digging for years. You just gave us the proof to pull the rest of the thread." Slid the rifle into its case. "Be careful, Colonel. Threads lead to uniforms. He studied her face, the burn scars catching the low light, the faint tremor she hid under discipline. "You're right," he said, "but someone has to follow them." She leaned back against the wall, folding her arms. "And you want me to help?" "I want you to testify," he said, "to tell them what happened in that valley." Her expression hardened. "I already did, to the dirt, to the men who died there. That's the only confession that matters." Mitchell stood slowly. "You saved 3 lives, Captain. Don't let that be the end of what you saved." He placed a sealed envelope on the nightstand, stamped with federal markings. "What's this?" "Evidence transfer order, classified until you sign it. Inside is everything we've gathered since 2017. Bank routes, call logs, internal memos. You'll recognize some of the names." He turned for the door, then hesitated. She looked up. "When you were gone, the men you saved, they never stopped looking for you. You should know that." Her breath caught for the first time. "They were told I died. They were told a lot of things." The door closed behind him. The room felt smaller. Hours passed. She didn't open the envelope right away. Instead, she sat at the small desk, staring at the rifle case like it might speak first. When she finally broke the seal, the scent of paper and dust filled the room. Inside, photocopies, wire transfer data, intercepted comms, lines of numbers connecting men she once saluted. And near the bottom, 3 photographs. Older, uniformed, alive. She traced their faces with a fingertip, a strange warmth stirring where only numbness had been. Then another paper slipped free, an address in Colorado Springs. Scrawled beneath, "If you're ready." The next evening she went. The house sat at the edge of town, lights low, 2 vehicles out front, military plates covered with dust. She knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. Stood there, time had thickened his frame, silvered his hair, but his eyes, the same pale blue that used to scan the horizon through scopes, lit up when he saw her. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, "you really made it." Appeared behind him, and then, the youngest of the 3, holding a mug he nearly dropped. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then said quietly, "I told you to let me go." His voice cracked. "We did, but we never stopped watching your 6." She stepped inside. The room smelled of coffee and gunpowder. Old habits die hard. On the table lay maps, files, laptops. They'd been working just like she had. "You were investigating," she said. "For years," answered. "Off the books. We knew Mason's story didn't fit. Every time we pulled a thread, it led to the same place. Money, contracts, missions that didn't make sense." Set the mug down, his hands shaking slightly. "When we heard about today, we knew it had to be you." Studied the board pinned to the wall. It mirrored her own work, same dates, same companies, same trails of blood money. Only difference was theirs had resources, hers had obsession. "You found pieces," she said, "but not the pattern." Nodded, "Then show us." She unfolded the evidence from Mitchell's envelope across their table. Bank transfers, shell corporations, procurement logs, lines connecting officers, defense contractors, politicians. A spiderweb of greed feeding on soldiers' lives. By the time she finished, none of them were speaking. Finally whispered, "How far up does this go?" Looked at him, and in her silence they all understood, farther than anyone wanted to admit. Exhaled, the sound shaky. "So what now? You planning on vanishing again?" She shook her head slowly. "No, I'm done hiding." Her voice steadied, calm and dangerous. "We take it apart piece by piece. Same way they built it, quiet, precise. No glory, no press, just truth." Smiled faintly. "The White Death returns to paperwork." She met his eyes. "This time the paper bleeds." Outside, the night deepened over Colorado Springs. Through the window, watched the streetlights flicker on one by one. For 8 years she'd hunted ghosts, Now, finally, the living had caught up. The war wasn't over, only changed shape. In the distance, thunder rolled over the mountains. To her, it sounded like artillery. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Let it come." Because somewhere deep down, she knew what came next wouldn't be peace. It would be reckoning. The night didn't end. It just changed shape. Thunder rolled across the mountains like distant artillery as the four of them, and sat around a table cluttered with maps, files, and half-drained coffee cups. None of them had slept, none of them wanted to. On the walls, the network took form. Lines of red string, printed wire transfers, photographs of men in uniform shaking hands with civilians who smiled too easily. Each connection was a scar, each scar had a story. 47 names, muttered, tracing one of the strings with his finger. This can't all be real. It's real, said quietly. Every one of them took money from Snetwork. The name hung in the air like the smell of cordite after a firefight. The ghost organization behind half the dirty work in the shadows of modern warfare, smuggling intel, buying coordinates, turning classified missions into private investments. And somewhere in that web had been Mason, just one small link in a chain built on betrayal. Leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. I thought we'd left this kind of thing behind when we made rank. You don't leave rot behind, said. It just grows quieter. No one argued. For a moment, silence filled the room. Outside, rain began to fall in slow, deliberate drops, drumming against the window. Broke it first. So what's the play? We can't just hand this to internal affairs. Half of these names are internal affairs. Didn't answer right away. She stood, moving toward the map pinned to the far wall. Her movements were steady, deliberate, the same patience that had terrified Mason hours ago. I've spent 8 years following money, she said, but it's not about money, it's about silence. She pointed to a string that led from Mason's name to an overseas bank. Every payment passed through a holding account in Zurich. Guess who authorized the security transfers? Squinted at the paper. Deputy Secretary Harland, Pentagon Logistics, Jesus. He was in Denmark once, said. That caught them off guard. Denmark, repeated. What's that got to do with anything? She hesitated. He worked under my father back when I was a child. The room went still. His father, Colonel, had trained soldiers for NATO after defecting from Russia. He'd believed in alliances, in the idea that soldiers on either side of an ocean could trust each other. He used to bring Harlan to our home, said softly. They drank together, talked strategy. My father taught him Danish cipher patterns, military codes that were supposed to die with his generation. Frowned, and you think Harlan. I think he never forgot them, finished. The rain hit harder now, a steady rhythm that seemed to match the pounding of truth. Swore under his breath. If this is true, then Harlan's not just a name on a paper trail. He's the buyer, the one Mason was feeding. Nodded, and he'll have noticed Mason's arrest by now. Looked toward the window. Then he knows you're alive. Didn't flinch. He's known for a while, he just didn't believe I'd come back. They spent the next few hours planning. Not with orders or ranks, those had burned away long ago, but with the quiet coordination of people who'd once trusted their lives to each other. Handled communication intercepts, contacting friendly analysts through unofficial channels. Cross-checked logistics data from procurement systems. Updated the evidence logs, digitizing every scrap of paper. Moved between them like gravity, silent, guiding, unrelenting. The clock ticked past 3 a.m. At one point looked up and asked softly, "Why come back now? You could stayed gone. You had every reason to." She paused, eyes distant, because ghosts can't rest while liars are still breathing. He studied her for a moment, and after. After what? When it's over. She didn't look at him. Then maybe I stop hearing their screams when I close my eyes. No one spoke again for a long time. By morning, the rain had stopped. The house smelled like burnt coffee and tension. Sat at the kitchen counter, scrolling through encrypted files on his laptop. I just found something. A message chain between Harlan's office and a shell company in Wyoming. Looks like he's setting up a meeting. 12 participants, private location, no digital logs. Leaned over, can you trace it? Not through standard decryption. It's obfuscated. Stepped closer, scanning the screen. Her eyes narrowed. Show me the encryption pattern. Frowned, you think you can break it? It's not encryption, she said after a moment. It's Danish, military code, old. Blinked, your father. Nodded, Harlan still using it. She grabbed a notebook and started writing, her handwriting sharp, deliberate. Within minutes, she translated the coordinates. It's a hunting lodge, she said. Wyoming, remote, private airstrip, he'll feel safe there. Looked at her, and we go. No, said. Not yet. We let them think Mason's death killed the trail. His death, asked. She turned to him. You think they'll let him live? They didn't have to wait long for confirmation. An encrypted message from Colonel Mitchell arrived that afternoon. Mason found dead in holding cell. Apparent suicide. Read it once, folded the paper. Stage 1, she said, cleanup. Cursed, they're erasing every link. Slammed his hand against the table, and we're just going to sit here. No, said, we're going to finish what Mason started. He led us to the gate. Now we open it. That night they drove north. The convoy was small, 2 vehicles, dark and unmarked. The sky stretched wide and empty above the highway, stars blinking like watchful eyes. Sat in the passenger seat, the resting across her knees. She brought the modern rifle too, packed neatly in its case, but it was the old weapon that felt alive in her hands. Drove in silence, headlights cutting tunnels through the dark. You ever think about forgiveness? He asked suddenly. No, said. Not even for yourself. Her answer came after a long pause. Forgiveness is for people who made mistakes. I made choices. The wind carried their silence the rest of the way. They reached the safe house just before dawn, an abandoned ranger station tucked into the trees near the Colorado-Wyoming border. It looked harmless, that was the point. Inside, set up their comm gear while rigged motion sensors around the perimeter. Started a pot of coffee so strong it could strip paint. Stepped outside, breathing the cold air. The sunrise painted the forest gold, but her eyes stayed on the horizon. The same horizon she'd watched once in Kandahar, praying for a QRF that never came. Footsteps approached behind her. You can't keep doing this alone, he said quietly. I'm not, she replied. You're here. That's not what I mean. She turned slightly, then say it. You're carrying ghosts more than you can hold. You've been fighting the same war for 8 years. It's eating you alive. Her gaze drifted to the rifle leaning against the railing. It's the only thing that kept me alive. He hesitated, then said, You know, still calls you ma'am. Still checks his gear twice like you'll inspect it. We all changed when you vanished. You burned so we could keep breathing. I didn't burn for glory, she said. I burned because someone had to hold the line. And now? She looked at him then, really looked. The man she'd once led through ambushes and night raids, older now, lined with guilt and years. Now I hold it again, she said softly. But this time it's not bullets I'm firing. Inside called out. We've got a ping, satellite intercept, secure channel, it's Harlan. Meeting confirmed for 48 hours from now. Coordinates match your translation. Walked back in, then we're out of time. Looked up from his terminal. Commands mobilizing, Mitchell's on it. Shook her head. No official response. Not yet, they'll scatter before anyone gets there. We go first. Frowned, that's suicide. So was Kandahar, she said. and 3 of you still made it home." Her tone wasn't pride, it was a statement of debt. Leaned forward. "If we do this, we do it clean. No firefight, no martyrs, we expose them." "Agreed," she said. She turned to the table, unfolding the Wyoming map. "We go in at dusk. Harland expects protection, not ghosts. We'll give him both." Outside, the wind had shifted east. Stood alone for a moment, staring toward the rising mountains. The scars along her jaw ached with the coming cold. She rubbed them absently, remembering the burn clinic, the endless hours of reconstruction, the smell of antiseptic and hopelessness. Back then, she'd thought survival was the miracle. Now she understood. Survival was just the opening act. Justice, that was the encore. She whispered into the wind, barely audible. "For David, for the ones who burned." The forest absorbed her vow. Behind her, the team prepared, checking rifles, loading mags, syncing comms, the familiar rituals of soldiers heading into a mission that might be their last. This wasn't a war zone, not officially. But everyone in that cabin knew what it felt like to step into one. Lifted running her hand along the smooth, worn wood. In her reflection on the rifle's steel, she saw both the woman she'd been and the weapon she'd become. Somewhere between them was the truth. And she intended to fire it. The night before the operation was too quiet to trust. Sat by the window of the ranger station, her silhouette barely visible against the forest beyond. The others were asleep, or trying to be. Snored softly on the couch, half-dozed with his comm headset still around his neck, and pretended to review intel even as his eyes flickered with exhaustion. Only stayed awake. Sleep to her had long ago turned into a battlefield. She could still see it, Kandahar. The phosphorus streaks in the air, the screams through static, the moment when Mason's voice cut off mid-sentence. Some memories didn't fade, they calcified. She rubbed her burned hand absently, feeling the faint tremor of nerves beneath the scar tissue. Each line in her skin was a map to somewhere she never wanted to go again. Outside, an owl called once, then silence. At dawn they moved. 2 unmarked SUVs, light packs, minimal gear, no insignias. The only constant was the weight of their weapons and the heaviness of what waited ahead. The drive north was long and narrow, through twisting mountain roads slick with frost. Handled navigation. 5 hours to target if weather holds, he said. Didn't respond. She was studying the map, tracing her finger over the ridge lines leading toward the coordinates. Glanced at her from the back seat. "You really think Harlan will be there in person?" "He'll come," she said. "He's arrogant. He likes to make sure the fire burns before he leaves." Snorted softly, "And we're the water." Looked out the window, eyes distant. "We're the reminder." By midday, clouds had gathered low over the Wyoming hills. The road turned to gravel, then to dirt, then to nothing more than tire tracks swallowed by pine and snow. Slowed, last chance to back out. Cracked a faint smile. "We didn't back out in Kandahar, not gonna start in Wyoming." "Yeah," muttered, "but in Kandahar we didn't know the enemy's payroll department." Reached forward and checked the bolt on her. The metallic click broke the tension. "Focus," she said. "No one fires unless I say." They all nodded. The mission was simple. Gather proof, transmit evidence, leave before the cleanup teams arrived. Simple on paper, deadly in practice. They arrived 2 miles from the coordinates and abandoned the vehicles, continuing on foot. The forest swallowed them whole, quiet, dense, heavy with the scent of pine sap and cold earth. Their breaths turned to steam in the fatting light. Each step crunched in rhythm with their heartbeats. Took point, scanning the trees through thermal goggles. 2 heat signatures ahead, maybe security. Crouched beside him, looks like a perimeter patrol, lightly armed. "Then we go around," whispered. "We're ghosts, not guests." They veered east, moving through the undergrowth until the first glimpse of the lodge came into view. A sprawling wooden structure sat nestled against a frozen lake, its windows glowing faintly orange. Luxury dressed in isolation. Muttered, "That's a lot of heat for a hunting cabin." Adjusted her scope. Through the lens she counted them: guards, SUVs, satellite uplinks. 10 men outside, probably more inside. She lowered the rifle. "This isn't a meeting," she said. "It's a command post." Frowned. "You think Harlan's staging something?" She nodded slowly. "He's not just covering tracks, he's planning the next op." His jaw tightened. "Then we stop it here." The plan came together fast, and would handle the power supply and communications jammers, cut the lodge off from the outside world. Would stay on overwatch, covering the approach. Would infiltrate alone. The others didn't argue. They learned long ago that she didn't ask permission to walk into hell. She checked her sidearm, her knife, her comm link. Then she lifted the same rifle they'd mocked on the range, the one that had outlived its century yet still shot than men half its age. Handed her a small earpiece. "If you get caught." "I won't," she said. He sighed. "You always say that." "And I'm still here." There was no smile, just the faintest flicker of acknowledgement before she slipped into the darkness. Inside the forest, time thinned to instinct. Every sound was a warning, every shadow a possibility. She moved like memory itself, present but unseen. At the perimeter fence she paused, listening. 2 guards murmuring in low tones. She waited until one turned his head, then threw a pebble into the trees. A single distraction, enough. She crossed the fence, silent as snowfall. Through a ground-level window, she saw them. Men in tailored suits around a polished table, whiskey glasses gleaming beside folders stamped "Top Secret." And there he was. Harlan. Gray hair, perfect posture, hands steady as if the world itself existed to obey him. He was older than she remembered, but arrogance didn't age. Her heartbeat slowed, breath measured. Through the scope, she could see the faint scar on his neck, the one her father had once laughed about when teaching him to shave. The past and present collided so hard, she almost forgot to breathe. Inside her earpiece, voice crackled softly. "Power grid offline. Jammers active. You've got 10 minutes before backup generators kick in." "Copy," she whispered. She circled toward the back door, slipped a thin wire into the lock. It clicked open. Every motion came back like muscle memory from another life. Inside, the air smelled of leather, wood polish, and expensive deceit. Voices echoed from the main hall. "The Mason issue has been resolved," Harlan was saying. "Unfortunately, his disappearance necessitated accelerated timelines." Another voice responded, amused, and the woman froze. Harlan poured a drink. Handled. She burned once, she'll burn again. Laughter. Something inside her snapped. Not rage, something quieter, colder. She stepped forward unseen, until she could see the room clearly. There were 12 of them. Government, corporate, military, all wearing the same confidence as armor. On the wall behind them hung a single framed photograph, her father, standing beside Harlan, shaking his hand. She whispered, "Record everything." "Already rolling," came the reply. She moved to the doorway, her presence still unnoticed. "Our next operation will neutralize remaining," Harlan continued. "Kandahar was unfortunate but necessary. Every system needs a sacrifice to keep it clean." The room murmured agreement. Raised her rifle. For a moment, her finger hovered over the trigger. But she didn't fire, not yet. She wanted them to see her. She stepped out of the shadows. "Sacrifice," she said softly. "You use that word too easily." The laughter stopped. Every head turned. Harlan froze, the glass halfway to his lips. When he finally spoke, it was almost admiring. "My God, you really are hard to kill." She took another step forward, rifle low but ready. "You taught me well." Harlan smiled faintly. "I taught your father, you were just watching." Her jaw tightened, and he was watching when you betrayed him. The silence that followed was absolute. Behind her, a security guard reached for his weapon. She turned, fired once. The old rifle barked, echoing through the hall. The man dropped before his gun cleared the holster. The room erupted into chaos. "Don't," Harlan shouted. "Hold your fire." The others hesitated. The woman before them wasn't a legend anymore. She was proof. "Why Harlan?" she asked quietly. "Why turn soldiers into currency?" He set the glass down carefully. "Because soldiers die, Captain. Empires don't. Someone has to fund what the politicians won't admit exists. By burning your own." He shrugged. "Collateral damage. Every age needs its ghosts." She stared at him, this man who'd once been a guest at her father's table. There was no remorse in his eyes, only calculation. "Then I suppose you'll understand what happens next," she said. He tilted his head. "Are you here to kill me or confess?" "Neither," she said. "I'm here to remind you." "Of what?" "That we don't stay buried." Outside, the generators kicked on. Lights flickered back to life. His voice came through the earpiece. "Feeds live. Data uplink transmitting to Mitchell's servers. The whole thing's going public." Didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on Harlan. He realized too late. "You're broadcasting." "Everything you said," she replied. "Every word." He lunged for the console on the table, but she fired again. One precise shot that shattered the control panel beside his hand. The room filled with smoke, screams, and the sound of boots retreating through doors and corridors. She didn't chase them. They were already finished. Harlan sank into his chair, staring at her with something like disbelief. "You'll destroy everything," he said. She stepped closer. "No, I'll rebuild what you buried." Minutes later, she was gone. By the time the FBI and military intelligence teams arrived, the lodge was empty except for shattered glass and the faint smell of gunpowder. On the table, one thing remained, a single bullet casing and a folded note. It read, "For those who forgot who they were sworn to protect." Back in the forest, rejoined her team at the point. Grinned through exhaustion. "Feed confirmed. Mitchell got it all. It's everywhere now. News, command channels, encrypted leaks. Harlan's done." Gave a low whistle. "You just started a war without firing one." Looked down at the rifle in her hands. The old's barrel steamed faintly in the cold air. "Not without firing one," she said softly. Glanced at her. "You think this ends here?" She shook her head. "No, men like him always leave roots, but at least now the world knows what grows in the dark." They stood in silence, the snow falling gently around them. For the first time in years, felt the burn inside her chest ease, just slightly. Maybe it wasn't forgiveness. Maybe it was something smaller, quieter. Peace shaped like exhaustion. As they packed their gear, asked, "What'll you do now?" She smiled faintly, the first time in a long time. "Go back to the range." He chuckled, still showing off that antique. Her eyes softened. It never missed. The team climbed into the SUVs, engines growling to life. And as they drove down the winding road, the first light of dawn spilled over the mountains. It wasn't victory. It wasn't closure. But it was morning. And Ford, that was enough. The news broke before sunrise. Every major channel carried it. Leaked files, intercepted communications, and a recorded voice that could belong only to one man. Deputy Secretary Harlan, confessing to a network of covert deals that had turned soldiers into currency. By breakfast, the headlines filled every mess hall and every base. Kandahar cover-up, inside the secret trade of lives for funding. Collateral damage, the words that shattered a generation. And beneath the footage, a single still image spread like wildfire. A woman, half-lit, half, holding an old rifle against the cold. They didn't know her name yet. But they would. At Fort Carson, Colonel Mitchell watched the broadcast in silence. He stood alone in the briefing room, hands braced on the table, the same table where she'd first been mocked for that rifle. The other officers whispered outside, fear, denial, damage control. Mitchell didn't move. He'd been part of the machine too long not to know how it reacted when someone forced it to see itself in the mirror. The first step was always outrage. The second was silence. He poured black coffee, took one sip, and murmured to no one, "You did it. You dragged the truth into daylight." Somewhere far from the noise was already gone. The cabin was empty now, the maps burned, the strings cut. She'd left before dawn, the others still sleeping. No note, no farewell. That was how she operated, quiet exits, like ghosts leaving doorways ajar for the living. The old truck rattled down a mountain road, her rifle beside her, the sun just breaking through the clouds. She had no destination. Only distance. She stopped at a diner off Highway 26 when the gas gauge hit empty. The waitress was young, friendly, the kind of person who filled silence with kindness, because she didn't know what else to do. "Rough day?" she asked. Looked up from her coffee. The girl couldn't have been older than 20, something like that. The waitress smiled. "Well, whatever it was, you look like you won." Almost laughed. Won? If only she knew. She left a few bills on the counter and stepped outside, the cold biting at her skin. Across the street, a TV in a gas station window replayed the same clip. Harlan's confession, the files, the image of the woman with the rifle. Turned away before the girl inside could recognize her. Meanwhile in Washington, the storm grew teeth. Congress demanded hearings. News anchors dissected every phrase, every silence. The public called her a hero, a patriot. But inside the military she was something else, an embarrassment, a reminder. Files that had stayed sealed for 8 years were now open wounds. Names that had been protected now hung in the air like broken medals. Mitchell fought to protect what was left of her record. He knew the system, how it rewrote heroes into problems once the cameras turned away. "She doesn't want medals," he told them in closed rooms. "She wants meaning." But meaning was a line item. It didn't fit on a commendation form. 3 days later, they found Harlan. He'd vanished after the broadcast, only to be discovered in a private air hangar outside D.C. alive, arrested, and already negotiating. He didn't look like a villain anymore. He looked like a tired man in an expensive suit who believed, even now, that systems would save him. When reporters shouted her name, he only smiled. "She's not a soldier," he said. "She's a liability." Mitchell saw the clip on the evening news and nearly threw the remote across the room. But never saw it. She was hundreds of miles away, parked by the edge of a frozen lake, staring at the rippling reflection of a rifle across the water. The phone on the seat beside her buzzed, Mitchell's number. She let it ring. Night fell slow. She built a small fire, the flames reflecting off the metal of the. Every scratch on that rifle told a story. The night it jammed in the storm, the time she used it as a crutch when her burns were too raw to walk. She remembered her father's hands, showing her how to clean it, how to breathe between shots. "Precision isn't about aiming," he'd told her once. "It's about knowing when not to pull the trigger." She smiled faintly. "I learned Papa maybe too well." The wind shifted, carrying voices from a past that still burned. David's laughter. "'Squiet, thank you." The crackle of radios melting in heat. For a long time she just listened, letting the sound of the fire blur the line between memory and silence. By morning she drove south. A week passed, then two. The headlines began to fade, replaced by new scandals, new distractions. The world moved on, as it always did. But not everyone forgot. Private, now Corporal, found her. It was pure accident. A chance encounter at a veterans medical center in New Mexico, where had gone for physical therapy she didn't plan to attend. Froze when she saw her, "Ma'am." Turned surprised. For a heartbeat neither moved, then's eyes filled with tears. "They said you disappeared again," she whispered. "I do that," said softly. Stepped closer. "You kept your promise, you told me the truth about my brother." Nodded, "He deserved that much." Swallowed hard. "They're rebuilding the sniper program in his name. Operation, I thought you should know." Looked away toward the horizon. He'd laugh at that. Smiled through her tears. He'd say it sounds like a bad movie. That made chuckle, a small, fragile sound she hadn't made in years. Hesitated, then added, "Colonel Mitchell wants to see you. He said you don't have to come back, just don't disappear completely." Studied her for a moment. "You still on the range?" "Every morning." "Then keep your hand steady," she said. "That's how the world stays honest." And before could answer, was already walking away. That night Mitchell sat in his office, a single envelope on his desk. Inside, no signature, no return address, just a folded piece of paper. It read, "I told the truth, that's enough." He leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face, and whispered, "You never make it easy, do you?" Outside his window, Fort Carson's firing range echoed in the distance. 5 shots. Tight grouping. Almost the same hole. He smiled. She's still out there. Across the plain stood at another range, an old civilian one forgotten by most. The rested in her hands, steady as breath. She lined up her sights on a steel target 400 yards away. For a moment the world narrowed to the sound of her heartbeat and the smell of cold gun oil. Then she squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, crisp and final. She lowered the rifle, exhaled, and whispered, "For the ones who never got to." Somewhere behind her, a small boy watching with his father clapped. "That was amazing, ma'am. Is that an old gun?" Turned, smiling faintly, "Old enough to remember." The father grinned. "You military?" "Was," she said. "Well," he said, nodding at the target, "once a soldier, always a soldier." She considered that, eyes drifting back to the range. "No," she murmured, "once a soldier, always a witness." The man didn't understand, but he smiled anyway. And she smiled back gently. As they left, packed up her rifle. The horizon stretched wide, endless, clean. No applause, no medals, no headlines. Just the quiet dignity of a woman who had faced the fire and chosen not to become it. The truth was out. The ghosts were finally at rest. And as the sun dipped low over the range, its last light caught on the rifle's steel, turning it to gold. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The summons came wrapped in formality. A letter, plain and unmarked, slipped under the door of a motel room she hadn't told anyone about. United States Military Tribunal, Washington, D.C. Subject, request for testimony, Operation Kandahar inquiry. It had been almost 3 months since the leaks. Harlan was in custody, awaiting trial. Half a dozen officers had been suspended, 2 had disappeared, and 3 more had retired for health reasons. And now, at last, they wanted the woman who'd unearthed it all to speak. Sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the letter until the ink seemed to blur. The official language was polished, emotionless. "You are invited to provide testimony." As if truth were something polite. Outside, wind rattled the motel window. She thought of ignoring it. She thought of burning it, but ghosts didn't rest when silence returned. They just found new places to whisper. So she folded the letter neatly, slipped it into her jacket, and whispered to the empty room. All right, one last shot. The hearing room was colder than she expected. White walls, hard light, rows of uniforms sitting behind polished wood that reflected more brass than humanity. She stood at the center, unadorned, unranked, nameless on the placard before her. Vera Vulov, civilian witness. Colonel Mitchell sat behind her, his presence steady, wordless. He hadn't asked her to come, but when she walked in, he'd simply nodded. At the table opposite, Harlan sat cuffed, flanked by lawyers. He looked smaller now. The power gone, the arrogance dimmed. But his eyes were the same, sharp, searching, as if still measuring angles and outcomes. The presiding officer, a gray-haired general with tired eyes, cleared his throat. "Captain." "I'm not a captain," interrupted softly. He blinked. "Ms. Then, we appreciate your attendance." "Appreciation doesn't fit into this room," she said. A low murmur rippled through the audience. The general adjusted his papers, choosing not to respond. He gestured toward Harlan. "The defendant has requested cross-examination. Are you willing to proceed?" She nodded once. "Let's finish what's left." Harlan stood slowly, cuffs clinking against the table's edge. "Miss," he began, voice smooth, composed. "It's surreal seeing you alive. You've caused quite the storm." "Said nothing." He smiled faintly. "I suppose you think of yourself as a savior now, a truth-teller." Her tone was calm, even. "No, just someone who finally stopped obeying orders." He tilted his head. "You think truth changes anything. You think the system collapses because you embarrassed it. It'll rebuild, cleaner, meaner. You handed it the excuse it needed." "I gave it a mirror," she said. "And mirrors," Harlan replied, "don't survive what they reflect." She looked at him for a long moment, this man who had turned her father's faith into a weapon. "When my father defected," she said quietly, "he believed in structure, in the idea that law and honor could exist in the same sentence. You taught him otherwise." Harlan's expression flickered. "Your father was." "No," she said, "he was loyal to something you never understood." "And what's that?" "Human life," she whispered. The silence that followed was heavier than any verdict. The general finally interjected. "Ms., please confine responses to questions of fact." She turned her gaze to him, voice steady. "Fact is what burns, sir. Everything else is politics." Mitchell exhaled quietly behind her, knowing the tribunal would hate that. Harlan smiled again, faint, venomous. "You think these people care? Half of them were there. They signed the orders. You just dragged their names into daylight. Do you know what happens to people who make the powerful feel small?" "Yes," she said softly, "they sleep better." For the first time, Harlan faltered. The general cleared his throat. "That's enough, Mr. Harlan." But wasn't finished. "You called Kandahar a necessity," she said, stepping closer to the table. "You called men like David expendable. Tell me, do you remember their names?" Harlan's jaw tightened. "I remember outcomes." "Then let me remind you," she said. "They're not outcomes. They're scars that refuse to fade." Harlan looked away. And that was the first honest thing he'd done in years. The tribunal continued for hours. Questions, rebuttals, documents, evidence. Through it all, his voice stayed low but unbroken, describing missions, timelines, transmissions, everything she had kept locked inside for nearly a decade. Her words painted no glory, only gravity. And when it was over, the general asked the final question. "What do you want, Ms.?" The room went still. Looked around at the rows of brass, the cameras, the notebooks, the polished boots. "What do I want?" she repeated softly. She took a long breath. I want soldiers to stop dying in wars that don't exist on paper. I want kids who sign contracts to understand what they're signing for. I want one briefing room, just one, where someone says this isn't worth a life before they say execute the mission. Her voice cracked slightly. And I want to stop hearing apologies that sound like excuses. The general's face softened. He didn't write anything down. He just nodded once. Thank you, Ms. That will be all. When she stepped outside, the light was blinding. The day was clear, almost too beautiful for the kind of truth that had just been spoken inside. Mitchell was waiting at the bottom of the steps. He offered a salute, not regulation, not ceremony, just a quiet acknowledgement between two souls who'd survived the same fire. You did good, he said. I did necessary, she replied. He hesitated. They'll want to give you something for this. Then tell them to keep it, she said. They already took enough. He smiled faintly. Where will you go? She looked out toward the horizon, wherever the wind doesn't ask questions. He nodded. If you ever need a range, Fort Carson's still got one. She chuckled softly. I'll bring my antique. That night, she stayed in D.C. just long enough to watch the city lights flicker on, rows of windows glowing like constellations, made of ambition and compromise. In one of those offices, Harlan was signing plea deals. In another, some committee was already drafting reforms that would water down her words until they sounded safe. She didn't care. You can't control how truth travels, only that it gets released. A week later, news outlets ran her face again. They called her the woman who broke silence, the sniper who took down the machine, but didn't read them. She was already gone again, this time north into the wide spaces where her name didn't matter. Sometimes she slept in her truck. Sometimes she traded rifle lessons for gas money. Sometimes she simply sat by rivers, listening to water move like time that refused to stop. She didn't know if what she'd done had changed anything. But she knew she'd told the truth. And in a world built on noise, truth was louder than bullets. Weeks passed. Then one evening, in a small diner outside Montana, she saw something that made her pause. On the TV above the counter, a military graduation was being broadcast. New recruits. Polished boots, bright eyes, all hope. And in the front row stood a young woman holding her rifle just a little differently, steady, deliberate, as if remembering a lesson she'd never been taught but somehow always known. When the camera zoomed in, saw the patch on her shoulder. KIM unit, for those who held the line. Her breath caught. She smiled, small and proud. The waitress walked by and caught her glance. You know someone up there. Looked at the screen, her eyes soft. Maybe. The woman nodded and left, and returned to her coffee. Outside, snow began to fall, quiet, clean, endless. She watched it for a long time. And for the first time since the valley, since the fire, since the endless ache of betrayal, she didn't feel the ghosts pressing against her ribs. They were still there, yes, but quieter. Because maybe ghosts don't vanish when justice comes. Maybe they just finally stop screaming. Later that night, she parked by the edge of another forgotten range. She unpacked her rifle, felt its weight settle into her hands like an old friend. The world around her was silent, except for the steady rhythm of her breathing. She sighted in on a distant marker. Nothing alive, nothing to kill, just a point of focus in a world that finally made sense again. The first shot cracked through the air, echoing across the valley. Then another, and another, each shot slower than the last, each breath deeper, until at last she lowered the rifle, smiling through the cold. She looked toward the mountains and whispered, almost to herself, "They're still listening." Snow fell softly that morning. Not the violent kind that buried towns or snapped trees. The quiet kind, weightless. The kind that made the world feel like it was finally holding its breath. Sat by the edge of the range, her old across her knees. It looked almost out of place here, an artifact surrounded by frost and pine, as if time itself had forgotten to take it away. The air was still. The mountains in the distance glowed pale beneath a washed-out sun. She hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks. Didn't need to. The truth had its own echo, and it carried far enough. Her radio crackled, the same battered piece of equipment she'd carried since Kandahar. The range officer's voice came through faintly. "Ma'am, we're about to close for weather. You sure you don't want to come inside?" She smiled faintly. "Just one more group." The man chuckled. "Copy that, you always say that." She set the radio down. He wasn't wrong. There was always one more shot left in her. She adjusted her scope, aligned the sights, and inhaled deeply. Even now, the ritual steadied her heartbeat. The cold bit at her burned fingers, but she didn't mind. Pain, in its own strange way, had become her rhythm, the reminder that she was still here, still able to aim, still capable of control in a world that had often stripped it away. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. A slow exhale followed. The bullet struck exactly where she wanted it to, the smallest sound in the far distance, metal on metal, a whisper of precision. She watched the vapor trail fade into nothing. And for a fleeting moment, she wasn't a soldier or a ghost or a survivor. She was just a woman listening to the wind. She didn't notice the truck pull up behind her until she heard boots crunching over snow. "Always the same spot," a voice said. Turned slightly. Mitchell stood there, hands in his coat pockets, smiling in that half-tired way men do when they've seen too much and learned to live with it. "You track me now?" she asked softly. "Took me a few months," he said. "You're not easy to find." "I'm not supposed to be." He looked around at the endless white, peaceful out here. "It's honest," she said. He nodded. "That it is." He handed her a small envelope. She didn't take it. "What is it this time?" "An offer," he said. "No tricks, no missions, just a teaching post. Civilian marksmanship program, new recruits, they're calling it Project. Your methods inspired it." Looked at the paper but didn't move to open it. "Inspired." "Your story did," he said. "Your truth." She smiled faintly. "Truth doesn't inspire, it exposes." Mitchell exhaled slowly, the cold turning his breath to fog. "You're still carrying it all, aren't you?" "Every shot," she said. He nodded, stepping closer. "Then maybe teach them what it costs to pull a trigger, make sure they don't forget." She glanced at him. "You think they'll listen to someone like me?" "They'll listen," he said, "because you're not selling them glory." That made her pause. For the first time in a long while, she considered the idea. Not redemption, that wasn't what this was about. Just purpose. Something quieter than justice, but just as real. That night she sat by the fire in her cabin. The letter from Mitchell lay open beside her, its edges curling in the heat. Teaching. It sounded simple, almost absurd after everything. But maybe that was the point. The world didn't need more heroes. It needed people who remembered what heroism cost. She reached for her rifle, cleaned it slowly, methodically, like she always did. Each swipe of the cloth, each motion of oil and steel, was an act of reflection, not worship, not obsession, just memory made tangible. In her mind, she heard her father's voice again. "Every weapon remembers the hands that built it, and the hearts that broke while it fired." She smiled, whispering, "Then this one remembers everything." Weeks passed. Winter began to thin. The training camp wasn't much. An old Air Force outpost turned into a joint facility for marksmanship, survival, and tactical awareness. When she arrived, the recruits didn't recognize her. They just saw a quiet woman with scars on her hands and a rifle that looked like it belonged in a museum. They smirked at first. Then she fired her first demonstration shot, and the smirks vanished. By the end of the week, they called her Instructor V. No one dared call her ma'am. She didn't teach killing. She taught patience, restraint, accountability. When one cadet asked, "Ma'am, how do you know when to take the shot?" she answered, "When you can live with the sound it makes afterward." The boy didn't understand it then, but years later he would. One afternoon, Mitchell visited again. He stood at the edge of the range, watching her correct a young soldier's grip. Her movements were calm, deliberate, her tone patient. When the lesson ended, she walked over to him. "Didn't think you'd actually come," he said. She shrugged. "I ran out of places to disappear." He smiled. "You look lighter." She nodded slowly. "Teaching feels like shooting without blood." "That's the closest we get to peace," he said. She didn't disagree. He handed her another envelope. "Harlan's dead." She blinked. "How?" "Heart failure, prison hospital." She said nothing. After a moment she whispered, "Then it's over." Mitchell shook his head gently. "The story maybe, but not the lesson." She looked at the young recruits down the line, all of them firing, all of them missing, all of them learning. "No," she said quietly, "not the lesson." That night, long after everyone else had left, she stayed behind. The moonlight spilled over the targets, glinting off brass casings scattered in the snow. She walked the line slowly, collecting them one by one, as if each belonged to a memory she refused to waste. When she reached the far end of the range, she stopped and looked back. Rows of targets pocked with holes. Some clustered tight, some wild and aimless. She smiled faintly. "We all start somewhere." Then she lifted her rifle one last time. No scope, no precision, just instinct. The shot rang out, clean and final. It hit the center. She exhaled and lowered the rifle, whispering into the cold, "For all of us who held the line." Months later, when spring came, the recruits planted a small oak tree beside the range. They didn't know who suggested it or why, but they named it the tree. A plaque beneath it read, "To those who taught us that truth has recoil." Years would pass before anyone asked where she went. Some said she retired quietly in the mountains. Some said she vanished overseas, working private rescues for soldiers left behind. Others claimed she still came back once a year, when the range was empty, to fire a single round at dawn. No one ever proved it. But every spring, when the snow melted, the recruits swore they found a fresh brass casing beside that oak tree. And the legend stayed alive. Not because of what she'd done, but because of how she'd done it. With silence, with scars, with purpose that didn't need applause. In the end, never asked to be remembered. She only wanted the truth to stay louder than the lies that buried it. And maybe that's what made her story endure. Because heroes rise and fade. But the ones who teach, they echo. Long after the rifles go quiet. Long after the ghosts are at rest. And in that silence, you can still almost hear her voice, steady and calm. Aim true. Breathe steady. And never forget who you pull the trigger for. The wind carries it softly across the range. Then the world grows still again. No headlines. No cheers. Just snow. And the faint, eternal sound of truth traveling farther than any bullet ever could.